Namaskar, Nileshok, in another series or another episode of Dr. No Shorts, not series, number 16. And in this episode, we will look at very ancient, but also very modern doubt clearing machine of Rishi Gotama. Now, the name can be said as a Gotama because that's how it appears in many places, but also Gautama. It can also occur as Gautama. And we will not go into the debate about was it truly Gautam or was it truly Gautam. Both should be acceptable. Again, we should focus on the output, which is doubt clearing machine, or short form DCM. This is how it would look like. At its core, it has 5 elements. At the center is the triangle, and the 3 corners of the triangle are described by sage Gotama in one sutra of Nyaya Darshan. Now, because the subject of various Darshan-Shastra is complementary to each other, I have also sometimes pulled additional words from other Darshan-Shastra. Keep in mind, they are complementary. A good analogy would be, a good upaman would be the scientific background, okay, the Tarka Shastra, Tantra Yukti, Vijnana Buddhi that we employ, whether we are studying something in physics, is exactly the same the way we will employ it if we are studying something in chemistry, and is exactly same if we were studying something in, say, biology. However, because the subject matter is different, there could be slight variation. And that is how it would be useful to look at the variations that you see across Darshan Shastra. So the specific sutra sage Gautam refers to in his Nyaya Darshan, composed thousands and thousands of years ago. Quickly, we know that it exists in Mahabharata, not specifically Nyaya Sutra, or not specifically that says sage Gautama's Nyaya Sutra, the way we have a text today. But Nyaya as a subject, okay, did exist in the Mahabharata. So definitely we know it existed as a science, as a discipline more than 7,500 years ago. It definitely existed at the Ramayana times. We know that from the descriptions of it in Valmiki Ramayana. So we can confidently say that it existed more than 14,000 years ago. That is the time of Ramayana. But how old it is, we do not have a decisive evidence to state it. But what we can say decisively is definitely 14,000, more than 14,000 years old. All right. So that one sutra that we find in Nyaya Sutras, sage Gautama's Nyaya Sutra, Nyaya Darshan, is Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, Shabda, Pramanani. Okay, that is that middle triangle. Now, Shabda could have an extended meaning in terms of a background knowledge, in that sense, Agama, which, for example, Bhagwan Patanjali or Patanjal uses it. Patanjali Muni has a sutra which says Pratyaksha, Anumana, Agama, Pramanani. That kind of tells you how there could be a slight variation. So these, the central triangle, Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana, Shabda, Pramanani. And in Nyaya Darshan and of course other darshan, you see the word Prameya, Prayojan, okay, and so on. And so is Agama. So these are the 5 things that are required. I have given the English meaning of them. Evidence can be seen as an explanation, because when you read something, suppose the evidence comes to us in the form of information, then it is written in some language and we have to understand what it is saying. Suppose we are reading a book on gravity. Okay, so the research work is done by Newton and so on. But in order to understand that, we have to understand the meaning of a specific word, meaning of a sentence, the connection between different sentences, and so on. So that also will come into evidence, but also part of explanation. So that top portion, think of this as a evidence and explanation. The greatest modern exponent of the philosophy of science is Sir Karl Popper. And how does he describe this? Again, he describes this 5-step formula in this fashion in our times, like in the last 100 years. He says the scientific method, or the logic of scientific method, or the logic of scientific discovery, is a triangulation of explanation, prediction, testing in the context of a theory and in the context of a background knowledge. You can see how consistent the modern scientific approach is with the wisdom insights of India's Darshan-Shastra, ancient India's Darshan-Shastra. And if you want to visually see that, it possibly helps to look at this tripod. So you have that surface, which sits on those 3 legs of this tripod. And those 3 legs are required minimum for stability. Okay. And that top surface is what is actually going to hold it, which is like a solution. Like you need something to hold something else. And that's like the theory. Now that theory stands on 3 legs, and those 3 legs are what? This explanation, prediction, testing triangle. Okay, that gives the strength to that theory. That is how you actually test the theory. You say, okay, is this sufficient? Now, is this functional, form, fit, design, design philosophy, right? Form, fit, and function. Is it functional? Is it fit? Does it have a right form to solve the problem? Okay, so, or is this a functional tool? You know that with the help of that central triangle. And of course, the whole thing has to sit on something. So that's the background knowledge. Okay. Every time we are trying to solve a problem, we are not going to start from a scratch. Not that there is a problem with it. Okay. And I use this metaphor, and I would like to use that metaphor on all the time. Imagine if every time we start where Adam and Eve began, then practically and in a pragmatic sense, we cannot expect to go any further than what they achieved. If you look at the ancient Indian narratives context, Adam and Eve would be, metaphorically speaking, equivalent to, say, Manu and Shatarupa. Okay, so from there, that's why we are called Manava, okay, or main, main referring to all human beings in the old times, okay, because we are the descendants of a Manu. And so if Manu and Shatarupa, wherever they began, if we start there every time, or we insist that we start every time, then there is no possibility of we making further progress. That's where the background knowledge comes in picture. Okay, when so much work has taken place, at some point, everything in the background knowledge was considered suspect. But how did that suspect information become a well-established information? Many people are under an extremely foolish notion that happened through consensus. That is not how science works. That is not how Nyaya Darshana works. Okay, it becomes a part of a background knowledge because of the repetitive testing, the reproducibility and repeatability, and stability and linearity and calibration and resolution. All of this repeatedly show that whatever is claimed is true, comes out true. And that's how something becomes part of a background knowledge. Okay, so this is actually the sage Gotama's doubt clearing machine. If you want to look at as a complete picture, I am going to add 2 more things. So now, yeah, you have got a machine, but what do you want to do with it? Well, you use it to solve a tough problem, something that is not been solved by other machines or by other people's attempt using the same machine, but they have not been successful. So the machine kind of doesn't change. I mean, the DCM, the doubt clearing machine, doesn't change in the scientific process or in the India's Darshana-Shastra process. Okay. So you find a tough problem, a tough problem, which is a saprayojana sandigdha, because people have tried and they have not solved it. And if saprayojana, in the sense, it is worthy, it's worth solving. Because if you solve it, it's going to lead to a great expansion of knowledge. Okay, we are going to have many other insights that we are lacking right now. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So therefore, you start with a problem. You do the Purva Paksha, which is to say, understand how everyone else so far have tried to solve this problem, even if they are not successful. And based on that, you learn from their insights, and then you may propose a new solution if you are successful. And if it fits the criteria of a science, that itself is a great progress, even if you have not solved the problem. But many people just stop there, and that's extremely unfortunate. Many people I see in the conferences just come there and propose a theory and now say, guys, you should solve it. That's utterly nonsensical. Nonsensical not because they just propose a theory. Most of this theory, if you just propose a theory and you cannot do anything else with it, you cannot touch the other corners of this DCM, doubt clearing machine, there is a big problem with what you have proposed. Okay, in that sense, it's nonsensical. But by tapasya, by your efforts, tenacity, perseverance, trial and error, if you succeed, and by the blessings, okay, if you succeed, then what you see is like Amrutam. Okay, there is in Bhagavad Gita has that, it's just not easy stuff. Many people just give up right away. I mean, last 10 years of experience, I'll tell you, hundreds of people. Okay, I mean, actually, I just, as a generic term, I use the hundreds of people. Actually, there are many more who have approached me and they get excited reading what I have done, and they want to, or sometimes not even reading. Sometimes they just have this perception of something very exciting he has done. I also want to do the same thing without even knowing what I have done or how I succeeded, or how long I was doing, or what kind of failures I went through. Anyways, so they want to do it. And now what happens? They come here, they start something, and as soon as I give them something to work on, so I stopped doing it now, guys, they run away because they have no idea what is involved in this trial and error, how many failures one has to face. Okay, and but if you, that's therefore I said, if by luck, if you succeed, then what gives you is that will make you joyful. For example, the initial pain, I mean, if you don't go through the pain, if you easily in a very short time, you just made some come up with something new, and you think it's a new, think again, because usually it doesn't happen like that. Now there could be exceptions, but Bhagavad Gita talks about it. Yatad agre vishamiva pariname amrutopamam tat sukham satvikam proktam atma buddhi prasadajam. Like atma buddhi in the sense of doing something original, okay, with your own efforts and not just copy paste, is not easy. And yatad agre vishamiva, usually the description of such original research, okay, innovative work in any field is like this. It has these characteristics. Yatad agre vishamiva. At the beginning, it feels like a poison. Pariname amrutopamam. But when finally you succeed, it feels like amruta. Tat sukham satvikam proktam atma buddhi prasadajam. Okay, it's a description of a happiness of a sattvika kind. Tat sukham satvikam. Okay, such a thing is called proktam atma buddhi prasadajam. Just feel prasad, happy not in the ordinary sense. Okay, that's not even beyond emotions. Anyways, that's a different subject. But back to this. So these are the 5 in the center, or 5 plus 2, like total 7 elements of a doubt clearing machine. That's it, guys. Now let's quickly look at a couple of examples. In this particular series, Dr. No Shorts, you are looking at tremendous evidence, archaeology evidence from around the world for flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka in 5525 BCE. And I mean, by the time you complete this series, you know how rich that evidence is. It should not leave any doubt in anyone's mind. So in your own mind, by watching this, by reading my books, by reading my blogs, by reading those original research papers, okay, you would have convinced yourself. But now you have to tell somebody what you have watched in this Dr. No's shorts series, or in my books, in my blogs, or those original papers. You have to give a summary to someone. What do? Again, you use these doubt clearing machines and the 7 elements of this doubt clearing machine. Okay. For example, let's take that archaeology evidence around the world for flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka in 5525 BCE. Before we began this, before I began, I should say, what was the question in my mind? What was the problem I was trying to solve? The astronomy evidence of Mahabharata is such a phenomenal evidence, such a decisive, empirical, scientific, logical. Okay, it's very robust. And that's why you see many people, Arundhati Vasishta, observation, just one of the 300 plus observation, has taken away the sleep of other Mahabharata dating researchers. Okay, by hook or crook, they are fighting with Arundhati Vasishta observation day and night. Why is that? Because you accept that one observation, your game is over. Okay, this is a good, that is the power of Arundhati Vasishta, and I'll show you one slide on that too. But imagine you go into a cave like the Altamira caves of Spain, or any just cave, and something that even been not identified by human beings. So no human beings have been there. And that's how these caves are. The Bhimbetaka caves in Madhya Pradesh of India, or Altamira, many people just did not know something existed there, or only some people knew. Now, suddenly you go into that cave, you don't know what to anticipate. And it's in such a way that there is not even a ray of light can enter. And then at the front, there are all cobwebs and so much that even the light cannot enter. But let's say you clean up those cobwebs, you take a torchlight or take a candle or some kind of a lamp, and you go inside the cave. Guess what? The darkness might have persisted there for thousands and thousands of years. But just because it persisted for thousands and thousands of years, when you go there with a powerful lamp, the darkness is instant. Darkness disappears instantaneously. The Arundhati Vasishta observation has that kind of power. Okay, now people have to study to appreciate that, study to comprehend. Forget appreciation. First, you have to comprehend. Now, the other Mahabharata dating researchers who actually want to talk about Arundhati Vasishta observation and show how this is not important, it doesn't matter, actually shows its power. And they understand it. The question is whether Indian Hindus, Mahabharata enthusiasts are capable, are understanding it, want to understand it, are willing to put the efforts to understand it. That's like that Arundhati Vasishta is like that torch, taking it into a cave, and instantaneously all the darkness goes away. That is the power of that observation in practically showing the falsehood, okay, the falsity of 99% of all other dating claims for the year of Mahabharata war. That's why they are fighting. And I want them to fight, by the way. I want them to fight in every single creative way they can come up with it. So, but just to understand what is, for example, the Arundhati Vasishta observation in the context of DCM machine, the DCM. But before that, because in this series, we are looking at the archaeology evidence for flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka in 5525 BC. So where did this begin for me? So astronomy evidence is phenomenal. So why do I have to do something else? Well, actually, there is no need for it. But also understand the game of knowing the Sat. Satyena labhyas tapasa yesha atma. Atmadnyan. You cannot say at one point, now I'm a completely Atmadnyani, my Atmadnyan journey is over and now I know everything. No. In fact, if that happens, you won't be talking. Okay. So the path of Satya keeps on growing. Satyameva jayate nanrutam satyena pantha vitato devayana. As you know more and more Satya, you realize the path is getting wider and wider, bigger and bigger, longer and longer. There is a much more distance to travel. So similarly, once I completed, I wouldn't even say completed, but I had shown sufficient evidence beyond doubt, decisive evidence that Mahabharata war happened 5561 BC. But that is what? All the descriptions of Vyasadeva, 300 plus in the Mahabharata text, It's always talking about something up in the sky, which is phenomenal, because we cannot, we cannot contaminate that evidence. We cannot play around with it, because you cannot go out there and change the positions of the sun and the moon. Okay, so in that sense, it's a pristine evidence. But people say, well, okay, but the Mahabharata war happened right on the earth here in the northern India. Now, do you have some evidence? I mean, do we, not you, meaning they're not asking me. They ask me, but that's a stupidity. I mean, they have to understand there is no point. They're not challenging me. They are trying to understand. Or if they want to challenge, they are basically challenging the Mahabharata text itself. So the point is, do we have any evidence that is from the land? And in that context, this question comes. So this is a tough problem in that sense. Is it possible to establish the veracity of Mahabharata astronomy evidence in an independent fashion? But when I say independently in this case, it cannot be more astronomy evidence up in the sky, which actually I did find. For example, in Harivansha and so on, that beautifully matches. But what about something independent of astronomy and on the ground? And this is the Krishna's Dwarka and its destruction in 5525 BC is a beautiful example to answer that question. So before we do that, we need to understand what the background knowledge is. Okay, so understand what is known and what is unknown. There in this equation, this DCM, there can be only one unknown. Meaning, of course, you have a doubt, but in the remaining portion, there can be only one unknown at any given time. So let's look at the background knowledge. If Mahabharata war happened in 5561 BC, then flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka must have occurred. Prediction we are making in 5525 BCE. Why is that? Because Mahabharata text says that Krishna's Dwarka was flooded and destroyed by sea waters 36 years after the Mahabharata war. So we have already established. So remember, we are taking something that's already established. Therefore, it is now a background knowledge. So somebody, when we are discussing now 5525 BC and archaeology evidence, and somebody says, but I have a doubt about 5561 BCE. Now the person can have a doubt, but then person should not be spending time here, not wasting anybody's time here. Then the person has to go and read my books and watch my other videos. But if we're looking for the evidence for flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka, we have to accept 5561 BC as the background knowledge, then take additional evidence of Mahabharata of 36 years. Now the prediction is 5525 BC. Now we ask the question, for example, now, is there any terrestrial, because that's a terrestrial event, the description says sea waters going into it. Is there any, so what kind of evidence? Archaeology evidence, oceanography evidence, seismology evidence, sedimentology evidence, some kind of climatology, some kind of like tsunami, some kind of a physical evidence that we are looking for on the ground. Astronomy evidence is also physical evidence, but not on the ground. Okay, so do we have it? Now, what kind of prameya, what kind of theory we would need? Actually, theory is the same, but here, because now we are looking at the ground, this statement of a theory, the prameya would appear something like this. Archaeology evidence tends to preserve signatures of the past events. We know that from archaeology, right? We happen to dig for whatever reason, we find something few meters down the ground, under the ground. We take it, we date some organic material that we find, and it comes out to like say 7000 BC. We say, there were people living there 7000 BC, some living activity, if not human beings. Okay, or if you find some cooked food or something, then you say, somebody knew how to cook food 7000 years ago. That's like that. So archaeology evidence this is important, tends to preserve signatures of the past event. There is no guarantee. When that is not understood, then the utter foolishness of, where is the chariot in 5561 BC? Where is the horse in 5561 BC? Where is the elephant in 5561 BC? Where is the coin in 5561 BC? Where is some remnant of a blanket from 5561 BCE? Where is some remnant of a sword from 5561 BCE? That kind of foolishness begins. Actually, don't be surprised if you find any of these things that I just listed. If you find the evidence of that in archaeology records, and when you date it, it takes you to 5561 BC. No reason to be surprised based on this. But just because we cannot find it, or we have not found it yet, therefore to say this didn't exist is basically to not even understand Vijnana, not understand Darshana, not understand science, not understand logic, not have a common sense. Okay, so therefore the statement of a theory is very important. I did not say archaeology evidence always preserves the signatures of all past events. That is a stupid statement. It may not. But if we find something, and then we have to ask, can I connect with it? So archaeology evidence tends to preserve signatures of the past event. As a researcher, we are beggars, and beggars cannot be choosy. We have to just work hard and also pray, wait for a blessings, to find the evidence. So that's the prameya, or the statement of a theory, conjecture, guess, plausible solution. Then the evidence has to be available. Okay. And see, all the evidence that I have presented in this flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka in 5525 BC, what is the beauty? None of this was actually generated by me. I'm simply going into the research work done by others, okay, from different journals, internet, different sources, communicating with these individual researchers, okay, discussing these matters with them, requesting their papers, books, and so on. So these people, all of you, even actually exceptions, none, not even a single exception, none of these individuals were researching on Krishna's Dwarka and flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka. When did it happen? No, they were studying this for all kinds of things. That is also the intellect, the buddhi, how you can look at the data that was generated, created for something else, and use it for your purposes. Okay, so that needs that prajna, okay, a refined intellect, not ordinary intellect. Okay, so that is why Shraddha, Virya, Smriti, Samadhi, Prajna. So by luck, the evidence existed. If that was not there, I couldn't have done much. And again, as you watch, I briefly talk about the history of how I found the evidence, or what led me to that evidence, how I connected with the individual researchers, and so on. So we have evidence, oceanography, from the field of oceanography, from the field of sedimentology, from the field of seismology. This is all archaeology evidence. And now how do we test it? Well, we meaning actually has been tested. Now we have to comprehend what they have done. The dating via various methods. Just briefly, I'm mentioning here as isotope testing, for example, oxygen, nitrogen, carbon. When it's done with the carbon, typically what people are familiar with the radiocarbon dating. But guess what? The radiocarbon or radio dating, it doesn't have to be limited to carbon, but that's what people tend to know, which was discovered or which was innovated, whatever you want to call it, in not that long ago, 70 years ago, and been very, very successful. All right, so we got these elements. So what is the conclusion? I mean, as you keep on watching these Dr. No Shots, what is it telling you? The archaeology evidence corroborates 5525 BC. Now, do you see in that evidence anywhere a stamp saying Krishna's Dwarka was flooded and destroyed in 5525 BC? You're not going to find that. But there are many extremely naive individuals, okay, ordinary individuals, but also researchers, almost like when they're looking for evidence, as if like they are looking for some plaque, a framed plate, which says that, hey, this is where Krishna's Dwarka was flooded 5525. No, that's not how you get evidence. Okay, all right. And so it is a big conclusion. Krishna's solution, Krishna's Dwarka destruction in 5525 BC. But guess what? It also answers that first tough problem. Is it possible to establish veracity of a Mahabharata astronomy evidence independently? Indeed, this is a beautiful example of that. Let's quickly look at other examples and we are done. Same DCM, this is going to apply anywhere. Now, this is like going back in deja vu fashion, going back to say 1994, whatever that 1995 timeframe. Okay. I came across that Arundhati Vasishta observation, and then I asked Professor Murdeshwar, I said, have you heard about this? Because he was a good student of Mahabharata and most of the thing. He said, yeah, I have heard about it. And he mentioned Dr. Vartak's work, which means Dr. Vartak has tried in 3 different ways and he had not succeeded. Then I started looking at others and I realized many people are aware of it, all great students and researchers of Mahabharata. know this observation. S.B. Dikshit, Lele Shastri, Lokmanya Tilak, Pava Kane, V.B. Ketkar, P.V. Hole, Karandikar, Raghavan. I mean, just you can go through the long list. Okay, Vilandi Iyer, and so many others. But nobody has dared solve this. In fact, they thought this is impossible and so on and so forth. Okay, impossible in astronomy sense. Scientifically, that's just not possible. That's how, so that makes it a tough problem to solve. So scientifically, with science and technology that we are aware of, we cannot solve the problem. But Vyasadeva is very casually, nicely, beautifully mentioning Arundhati was walking ahead of Vasishta at the time of Mahabharata war. So the tough problem that we are looking at it, is it possible to astronomically validate Arundhati Vasishta's statement of Vyasa? Why? Because it's an astronomy observation. And why I emphasize astronomically? Because it is astronomy observation. Because there are some they're not even Mahabharata researchers, but they feel what you can say, they feel cocky enough or bold enough, whatever the right word, to talk about the dating of Mahabharata. And they have said, well, guess what? So when they come across this observation, there is one researcher who has claimed 1400 BCE. So that's like about 3,500 years ago. And you ask that person, so what's your evidence? And he will just scoff at you. Like, what evidence? What do you need evidence? No. Well, but hold on, the Arundhati Vasishta is telling you otherwise. That Arundhati Vasishta says, and you will see the conclusion again, but those of you who know it, based on Arundhati Vasishta observation and the latest and greatest of modern science and Indian astronomy and Mahabharata text, Mahabharata war is not possible even a day late, even a year late than 4508 BC. So based on what is he saying that? And this one conflicts with his claim. And he said, well, guess what? I can solve this. This is not even astronomy observation. It is all in the mind of Vyasa. Okay, so that kind of very naive, trivial, foolish explanation people will come up with, even intelligent people. I mean, this researcher that I'm just referring to, I have a great respect for his other work. I talk about his work more than even he talks about his work. But suddenly, and this is, to err is human. So somebody who does something very logically, scientifically in one place, there is no guarantee that that person may bring that logic, may bring that intellect, may bring that science in another place, me included. And precisely for that reason, Nyaya says no claim is intrinsically valid. Okay, authority, this is the basis of authority fallacy. Just because somebody, oh yeah, he has done some great work, therefore whatever he says is true. No, that's atrociously nonsensical way of thinking about somebody's claims. No claim is intrinsically valid. Not 5525 BC, not 5561 BC, no other claim. So how do we know? I mean, Shraddha can only take you somewhere. Shraddha says that this person appears to be sincere, and based on your level of Shraddha, by the way, because Shraddha is also three kinds. Trivida bhavati Shraddha, Dainansa Svabhavaja, Satviki, Rajasi, Chaiva, Tamasi, Chetitam Shunu. Krishna says to Arjun. 3 kinds. In a very broad fashion, 3 kinds. Sattva, Raja, Tama. But there are shades of, if you have heard 50 shades of gray, these think of 75 shades of gray are there into this. So, is it possible astronomically? You have to solve the astronomical. So now in that, what is the background knowledge you're going to use? If you understand Arundhati Vasishta's astronomy observation, it's just given that the background knowledge has to be relevant to that. The modern astronomy, Indian astronomy, and a Mahabharata astronomy. It has to be consistent with the Mahabharata astronomy, number one, because it is occurring in Mahabharata. Because Indian astronomy is not a stagnant science. It has evolved over time. So as a first condition, it must be consistent with the Mahabharata astronomy. The second condition, it must be consistent with the Indian astronomy. And the third condition is because now the modern astronomy has also given us enough confidence that it should be consistent with modern astronomy. And we may have to use any and all of this background knowledge. The reality was I had to use all 3. Okay, now what is the statement of a theory? Astronomy. See, the statement of a theory has to be very simple and generic and universal. Astronomy descriptions of Mahabharata are factual descriptions of Mahabharata times. And you can keep on improvising this. Astronomy descriptions of the time of Mahabharata war in the Mahabharata text are factual descriptions of Mahabharata times. Instead of just factual, you can say factual, actual, visual descriptions of Mahabharata times. You can keep on refining the definition, but the important thing is that it has to be always generic. It has to be always universal. That's the foundation of the logic of scientific method. That's the foundation of Nyaya Darshana. You can read in Nyaya Darshana chapter 4 and chapter 5 and see how the fallacies are created, futilities, futile discussions, how the nigrasthana, the point of rebuke, when people make blunders, not following this DCM properly. Okay, and they have to be warned, they have to be rebuked, and if they don't still learn, they have to be removed from the debate, declared as defeated. Same thing in our science. If somebody is claiming something and repeatedly after multiple efforts, the person cannot come up with the results that match their predictions, they have to accept that their theory is not correct. Okay, let's move on. Now, the evidence is there. Arundhati Vasishta observation, Bhishma Parva, Adhyay 2, 31 verse. Yachesha Visruta Rajas Trailokya Sadhu Sammata, Arundhati Tayapesha Vasishta Prashtata Krita. All right. And how are you going to objectively test it? Well, something that happened a long time ago, and we don't even know exactly when it happened. In fact, that is the very thing we were trying to find out. Did it even happen? Was this a true factual astronomy occurrence that Arundhati could be seen walking ahead of Vasishta from the earth? Because today we don't. Today we see Vasishta walking ahead of Arundhati. And therefore we know what it means when we say Arundhati walking ahead of Vasishta or Vasishta walking ahead of Arundhati. Many of the Mahabharata researchers who are fighting this Arundhati Vasishta day and night, as I said, they cannot even go to sleep, is because of what? Either they are so naive that they don't even understand the basics of astronomy, what is meant by somebody walking ahead or behind, or they're pretending. Now the first part, that's also very sad. The second one is even sadder, worse. Why is that? Because now the person is pretending to be asleep, pretending to be naive. Okay, what does it mean when Arundhati is walking ahead of Vasishta? But in our times, Vasishta is walking ahead of Arundhati. If you go back 1,000 years, ditto. 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 years, it's always Vasishta walking ahead of Arundhati. Vasudev is saying exactly opposite is happening at the time of Mahabharata war. So we have to, how are we going to create this pratyaksha of a time that is a past? That's where the improvements, the innovations in science and technology, Tantra Yukti comes in picture. We can do this with the help of astronomy calculation. That's what I did, by the way, initially. And now to show it to people, it's a lot easy to do it with simulations. Of course, if I had sophisticated simulations available then I could have done it like way back, possibly like 1995. I could have done it with the help of simulations. Unfortunately, such a sophisticated simulations, computer-based simulations did not exist then that were easily accessible. Okay, so astronomy calculations and or simulations is our way of getting that pratyaksha. That's what Mahabharata says. Doesn't matter which pramana you use, pratyaksha, anumana, upamana, shabda, upapatti, anupalabdhi, doesn't matter. At the basis of it is a pratyaksha. May not be your pratyaksha, maybe somebody else's pratyaksha, just like Vasudev's pratyaksha at the time of Mahabharata war. And I'm not saying the time right now, of course, we know what that year is, 5561 BC. But because when I started, we don't know that. In fact, we're trying to find out two things. Is it possible that Arundhati can ever go ahead of Vasishta? And then the second part is, if it is possible, when did that happen? Of course, there are additional questions. Why did that happen? But let's not even go there. So therefore, astronomy calculations and simulations, fast forward by 15 years, 1-5, and then finally I found the answer. And what was the answer? That yes, Arundhati actually walked ahead of Vasishta in the past. But when? Only before 4508 BC and only after 11,091 BC. So based on this, just one observation. Now there are these Mahabharata dating researchers again who want to create utter nonsense, utter foolishness, utter chaos, deliberate distortion for themselves, for their tiny brains, but for the in the mind of Mahabharata enthusiast who may not be technically savvy to understand this. So there is this another big stupid thing going on. Like I claim that only on Arundhati Vasishta observation, I decided that 5561 BC is the year of Mahabharata war. Utter stupidity. Whoever, if you hear somebody claiming that, understand it's a stupidity. It's a deliberate distortion. Okay. What the Arundhati Vasishta observation simply tells you is that the Mahabharata war is only possible between these two, between the time interval bounded by these two dates, 11,091 BC, only after 11,091 BC, only before 4508 BC. But again, I showed you like how that same doubt clearing machine is applicable whether you're looking at a terrestrial evidence, whether you are looking at the celestial evidence. In fact, the field, what field you are studying doesn't matter. What subject you are studying doesn't matter. Whether the subject is a itihasa doesn't matter. Whether subject is a psychology, subject is physics, chemistry, biology, medicine, engineering. It does not matter, guys, what the subject is. This is the robustness of this DCM. Okay, Rishi Gotama's doubt clearing machine, or Sanshay Nivarana Yantra, Sanshay Nirmulan Yantra. All right, quick summary. So all elements of scientific method or Nyaya Darshana, Avayava, are open to criticism. Today we shared 5 plus 2. That plus 2 are not part of the middle 5, but anyone claiming he has done something innovative, ask the question, what problem you are trying to solve and what is your final conclusion? And ask that person to say it on the camera and record it, because they change their statement just like a politicians. Okay, so Nyaya Darshana Avaya are open to criticism, but remember, only one at a time. And I showed it with a quick 2 examples. If you are now gone ahead and testing the claim of 5525 BCE for the flooding and destruction of Krishna's Dwarka, then right when you are doing it, you cannot come back and say, but I have some doubt about that 5525 BC as a prediction itself. No, then it's perfectly okay to have that doubt, but don't go here and try to study archaeology. Don't even ask that question, where is the archaeology evidence? Archaeology asking for some other independent validation of astronomy evidence comes into the picture if you are convinced of the astronomy evidence. Because if you are not convinced of the astronomy evidence itself, why even go somewhere else? Just ask, challenge the person right on the astronomy evidence. Don't go and ask, where is the archaeology? If you ask something else, which means you are convinced about astronomy. Okay. Again, a simple common sense logic lost on many. The critical requirement is that criticism can be of any one element at any given time. You can criticize, critique, challenge any of these corner points of the DCM multiple times, but at a given time, only one, and ask that person, wait for that person to respond. If you are not clear, you can keep on going, but don't jump to the next point until you are convinced of it. That is the method of science. That's the method of Nyaya Darshana. Now, Vitanda, that's another nightmare in this very naive space. Okay, any Dick and Harry in this social media days comes up and calls himself or herself a researcher. That is the problem with this. And they say, what's problem? What's the problem? I'm showing you faults in yours. I say, well, do you have a claim? I have a claim 5561 BC as the year of Mahabharata war. Do you have a claim? No, I don't have a claim. Then you cannot, I will not waste my time discussing with you. That is the definition of a Vitanda. That is understood in science, that is understood in Nyaya. Only these fools don't understand it. What is the definition of Vitanda as given by Nyaya Darshana? Swa Pratipaksha Sthapana Hino Vitanda. If somebody has a claim for something, you are saying that is wrong, but you do not have an alternate claim that you are ready to claim as a superior to that claim. Swa Pratipaksha. Okay, so against somebody's claim, you don't have your own pratipaksha, sthapana, hino. Hino is like a negative, like there is an absence of establishment of your own position for that particular claim, that particular problem, like the year of Mahabharata war, for example. If you don't have it, you're doing Vitanda. Nyaya Darshana speaks, that person is to be rebuked, to be smashed and thrashed and thrown out of the debate, to be declared as a defeated. But where are the Nyaya Darshaniks? Where are those people who have a decent knowledge of Nyaya? Forget, Nyaya and science, no difference. Where are those people who understand the basics of Vijnana Buddhi, scientific acumen? Vedanga has no place in scientific investigation or search for the truth. When we are all seekers, which means what? We are going, so Satya, the knowledge of Satya comes with trial and error, okay? In an iterative fashion, ansha say it comes. In that sense, we are seekers. And even when we land on the truth by luck, we are never sure, we are never confident, meaning never 110% confident, I'm just using the number, that we have found it. Of course, in a subjective judgment, you may be, okay? And at some point, that's what we have to accept, because there is no additional evidence at any given time anyways to be tested, or the evidence may exist, but we don't have a science and technology that is advanced enough to test that evidence. Then we have to stop, at least in a temporary fashion, we have to stop at that point. And therefore, we will accept that as a tentative truth. Now, we don't always use the word tentative. And that's why the likes of Shankaracharya, Adi Shankaracharya says, Satyanrute dve mithunikrutya vartate lokayatra. Okay, our journey, our everyday living, and the knowledge that we take for granted is actually a combination of Satya Anruta, okay, the truth and untruth. We are not sure that everything what we are using, you just take anything, exercise, what kind of exercise is good for you, how much exercise is good for you, what kind of nutrition is good. You get all these things. Just take something like hydrogenated fats, right? Like they were imposed on the world population in a very dogmatic fashion, almost like to destroy their health. It may not be, that part may not be intentional, but the profit was an intentional problem. Do you know the reasoning behind it? That will be another big episode, but it has to do with the availability of hydrogen. And that time people didn't know what to do with it. A lot of experiments were done. People figured out hydrogenation of fat, like monosaturated fats, turn it into like butter-like substance. And another deadly nonsense began that lasted for many decades. Okay, the important thing is, but we lived with that. People were using margarine, as a very healthy alternative on, slapping on their bread for breakfast. That lasted, and now there are proclamations by every country saying zero trans fat it can be used. Okay, otherwise you can be punished. The industry, food industry, manufacturers can be punished. In that sense, it's important to understand that anytime what we have is Satyanrute, a mixture of both. Therefore, in that sense, we are seekers. We are always trying to refine and go from like asatya to satya, but it's a journey, and it always remains a journey. In that sense, we are a sadhaka. If some sadhya may come to us, but with every sadhya, and I didn't spend time today on that, the path of the satya, it gets bigger and bigger. Satyameva jayate nanrutam. Okay, satyameva jayate nanrutam, not the falsity, not the fakery. Okay, but then it's satyameva jayate nanrutam, satyena pantha vitato devayanam. As you find, once you find little bit of truth, some magic happens. You think, oh, I'm done. No, you are not done. That is, you see that in the science every day, and you see that in our study of Adhyatma. Whether it's a Vijnana or Adhyatma doesn't matter. Adhyatma is a purification of Vijnana. Vijnana is a purification of Adhyatma. Every time you succeed, the path actually gets wider and wider. That is what Satyena Pantha Vitato Devayana. Okay, as Upanishad says. All right, we are going to stop here. These days, my Dr. No shorts are no longer remaining as shorts. So I have to do something about them. This is 50 minutes, but hey, that's how it is. All right, I'll see you shortly in another session of either Dr. No shorts or Shraddha and Pradnya series, or another series that I have began in Marathi, that is Upasana Ani Abhyas. So I'll see you in any one of those shortly. Namaskar.